Hey Student Success, this is your lecture video for Chapter 5. So Chapter 5, if you go into your materials folder, I have the textbook link up and running right here, and here are the slides. I'm going to use mostly the slides and then kind of just some discussion and referencing the textbook to go through. Chapter 5 is about reading to learn. So here are some kind of key takeaways. It discusses that college reading is pretty different than high school reading, and what the book means by that is in high school you may have had time to read in class, talk about the class, discussions with the text. In college, oftentimes reading is left on your own. The College Reading Learning Association did a study that said approximately 85% of what you learn in college is done through reading, and a lot of that is actually done outside of class. So your classroom time is spent for discussions or assessments or practicals or hands-on, whatever it might be. And then you are expected to do the reading outside of class to supplement all of that, but you're still tested over it. So there's a lot of personal responsibility for reading and understanding what you've read. So you should usually expect to read or study or review notes about 1 to 2, maybe more hours for every hour you spend in class. Now that's going to vary based on the class, obviously. Some classes you might not need that much time, other classes you might need more. So just keep that in mind, that whenever you make your time schedule, you want to build in not only your class schedule, your work schedule, but also homework time, time to read, time to reflect, and time to work with the material. And because reading is such an important part of that learning process, we do want to view it as a cycle. We want to look and see how can we make the best use of our reading time. When it comes to writing, oftentimes people they understand that writing is a process. I'm going to write my first draft, I'm going to rewrite it, I'm going to have to edit, I'm going to have to peer review. Same thing with reading. You may not always understand something the very first time you read it, and so we view reading as a process. We have to go through kind of different steps to help us make sure that we're active and we understand our reading. So these are the 4 basic steps, and sometimes you can get to this step and have to go back to this step, so it's not necessarily you have to do it in this order. So the first thing you want to do whenever you have a reading, sometimes an instructor might say, okay, read chapter 3, see you Sunday, or see you Monday, I guess. So you want to first be able to know, why are you reading? So if they don't give you a purpose, if they don't say, hey, we're going to talk about this, or you're going to have a test, you want to create your own purpose. So I'm going to read this chapter and then have, vocabulary I want to define, or I'm going to answer certain questions at the end of the textbook, or I want to be able to give my own summary. So set your purpose. It's going to oftentimes give you more of a focus and motivation to read, because oftentimes what students say is they read and then they doze off, or they start on page 1 and by page 20 they're completely lost and they don't know where they got lost from. So set a purpose. Then also do some previewing. Look through the section or the chapter or the text, whatever it is that you're reading, and look at the headings, the subheadings, the graphics, anything that's going to stick out to you visually that's going to help you start to kind of create some background knowledge, connect what you know to what you're about to read, also kind of give you a map of what you're going to read. So looking at those things and how the text is set up, how you think this material you're about to read is going to connect to the big ideas in your course or any personal connections. So looking to see even how long the chapter is, because that's going to help you plan your time. If you have a 20-page chapter on an article a topic you've never learned before, it's going to take you some time, right, to get through that. So you need to make sure you have the materials, you have the time. Now, if it's only 3 pages and you're really familiar with it, that's not going to take very much time at all. So that helps you as well. Again, you want to look through, get the lay of the land, set that prior knowledge into motion, have a purpose for reading. Then you want to go ahead and start reading. So what some students do, and is very helpful, is they use the headings or subheadings as questions. So they have a heading and they turn that heading into a question, and that helps them guide their reading. And then they can say, okay, by the end of this section, I should be able to answer this question. So connecting again what you know about the topic, what you're about to read, maybe do a quick Google search to see what else is out there. Just kind of start getting your mind ready to read, and then read through an entire section trying to understand it. This is generally where I would say a lot of students start taking notes or highlighting here. We don't want to do that quite yet. So whenever you read a section, you want to have your materials ready for sure, but you don't want to read or highlight or underline while you read. You want to read the section, then go back and highlight, annotate, take notes, or underline. Because as we read, we think everything is important. And so we oftentimes walk away with a text page that's almost all highlighted or almost all underlined. the kind of rule of thumb is about 25% of your page. 25% of your page should be highlighted or underlined or pulled out, just so you're getting the main points. You do that, and then as you are finished reading and you've highlighted or underlined or taken your notes, you look to see, are there any answers you can come up with for basically questions that you posed to yourself or that the textbook posed or your teacher posed. You kind of make connections between different sections or graphics, and then look to make sure that you know what's going on. So if you have 20 pages, you stop every couple pages and say, do I understand this? So that way, if you have an issue on page 4, you address it on page 4. You don't let it go all the way to page 20, realizing you've been lost. So that's why it's also important to like kind of chunk up your reading. Really, 2 or 3 pages at a time, so that you can really focus on smaller sections of text, not only for your attention purposes, but also just to make sure that you are really checking in with yourself and how well you're understanding it. So part of that process is, again, making sure you're able to understand the main ideas of each section. If you come across a word you're not familiar with, looking it up, defining it, using context clues. If you have questions, writing the questions in the margins or in your notes so that you can ask those questions in class. And then finally, something that you want to do, even if you don't have a test or anything, you want to review it. You want to think about, okay, what did I learn? What are the big takeaways? How would I put this information into my own words? Because yeah, we can regurgitate what the author says, but we want to make sure that we're also putting things into our own words. Look to see if you can answer the questions at the end of the chapter. How does it connect back to what's going on in your classroom? Maybe talk to other people about the text, see what their understanding was, and then kind of put all your notes together. And do all this before the lecture. So if you're lecturing or the teacher's lecturing on Thursday, try to do this, Tuesday or Wednesday, so that you can come into class ready to talk about it, ready to ask questions and clarify anything you might not have understood. And then of course, if you have a test to prepare for based on the reading, you might also, create a study guide, you might do flashcards, whatever that might look like. All right, so in chapter 5, there's always like that self-assessment, where do you want to go, some goals of the chapter. And then it does go through all of the little things we just talked about. Here's like the learning process as it relates to reading, why it's so important, different kinds of sources you're going to be working with as a college reader. And then at this stage of the game, we all have learned to read, but now we are reading to learn. We are really spending time and investing it in the process. And yes, doing all these things, previewing and setting up goals and setting up questions and then answering those questions and taking notes, it's going to take more time. But in the long run, it's going to actually save you time because you're working with it. So more than likely, it's going to be retained longer. So this section really talks about that learning process as it relates to reading. If you have any special kind of text, math text, science, foreign language, so on, this section talks about like how to approach those, because sometimes you do have to approach those in a very different manner based on the content area. Maybe vocabulary is an area that is a weakness for you. And so one of the things that in our chapters inside our reading courses is we talk about ways to build up vocabulary, using flashcards, going to places like Quizlet or freerice.com, or there's so many different vocabulary builders out there. Keeping a word journal, like especially as it relates to your content area, keeping a journal of content related vocabulary. So you're building that up, get a dictionary app on your phone, look at context, use it in your own sentence. All of these things are really helpful. Get familiar with prefixes and suffixes that are common or especially in your field. All right, so that is your chapter 5 lecture. See you next time.